Good morning. Uh, I think that we can start. Before we start, I would like to remind you that today you have new issue of Aspetar Sports Medicine Journal. That's from the beginning of the year, 310 page was published. Thank you very much for all of you for your contribution. And in this issue, I'm proud that my three associated editor, that means Vada Knez, Philip Londreau, and Rod Whitney, they published each of them a paper that I strongly advise to read it. And as you know, we office had work very hard. Velvet, Ivan, and Nicola, thank you very much. And till the end of the year, we have another 3 issue that is going to be published, and especially this one, I think that is going to be targeting issue about hamstring injury athlete, where guest editor is Bruce Hamilton. Is going to be very interesting for all these people who are so connected with daily practice and protecting these athletes. Also, I would like to remind you that these lectures finished at the end of June. This year, I prolonged it only till 2 July as the last lecture, because Bruce Hamilton is going to come here for a few days, and he is going to give us a lecture, and that's giving us also the possibility to see him a little bit with us. Today, I have to present Prof Karim Chamari. That's somebody who joined Aspetar 1.5 months ago. I know that he have lots of friends here, but he is working in research education center. He have interesting CV, because when he was young, he was an athlete of high level. He participated in Olympic Games in Barcelona '92 for his country, Tunis. That was surfing, wing and surfing. And he is expert like this, so you can enjoy of his help here in Doha. In same time, he had a huge experience working as a fitness coach in football. He have done his PhD in Montpellier in France. That's for the people outside of Europe, one of oldest medicine school in Europe. And he published more than 100 scientific paper. Also, he is going to work, and he is expert in Ramadan and sport. Please.
Thank you, Dr. Popovic. Good morning, everybody. On the behalf of Research and Education Center, and with the help of Dr. Anish Shawashi and Asma Alwi, I'm going to present you some data about Ramadan and sport. You know, the main characteristics of Ramadan are that this 1 month is a month of intermittent fasting, and we're going to speak also of the methodological issues related to the research in this field. I'm going to present you some general reviews about the general effects of Ramadan, and then we're going to go to the main topic of today, which is Ramadan and athletic performance and athletic training, and then we're going to conclude with some recommendations. As you all know, during this month of fast, there are a lot of changes in behavior and eating habits. There's a change in food timing, meal number, food composition, daytime activity, and also nighttime activity, especially for people who live during the night. And the bedtime is changed, the wake-up time too, the total sleep is changed, and the quality is also impacted. And there's obviously a big change in chronobiology. As you see, the main changes are more or less activity during Ramadan, and changes in the intake of food and the quality, in quantity and quality. These could be changed. Some of these changes could be related to the socioeconomic and cultural differences among people. So if you belong to people from Qatar, from Tunisia, of Singapore, you can have very different habits of fasting. The daytime obviously changes depending on two things. Mainly there is the geographical location with respect to equator. I'm going to see an example just later. And the time of the year. Obviously in the northern hemisphere, it's very long, there are very long fasting days during the summer, especially July and August. The environment conditions, especially the heat, could force some populations, like here in Qatar or the Middle East, to completely switch their way of life and living during the night and sleeping during the day. Here we can see an example of this Ramadan, which will start on the 9th of July and normally will finish on the 8th of August. Here in Doha, you have the daylight hours for the first day of Ramadan, and here the last day of Ramadan. That means that in Doha we're going to be fasting for 15 hours, while in Europe, I chose Brussels, which is one of the capitals of Europe, relatively at the north, not completely at the north of Europe. Here the fast is a challenge. It lasts 18 hours for you who don't see. So the people who fast know the difference of 3 hours, and especially if you train, this is a big issue. Let's come to the methodological issues of Ramadan research. You have a problem of sampling. If you take a blood sample, if you're looking, for example, for glycemia, it's easy after a night of fasting during normal time. But if you take the morning sample in fasters, it will not be in fasting state. These are some of the examples related to the issues of making some research in Ramadan. We're going to see a bit later, it's very important to monitor the body composition and also the food intake in quantity and quality. And there's obviously a change in physical activity as a whole, and especially if you training morning, training afternoon, training night, you're going to see all this a bit later. Where it comes to training, it's very important to monitor training load. You're going to see a bit later that if training load is decreased, as usually does the staffs, there's also a decrease in, usually there's a decrease in performance. So here in the black columns, you can see the training load of a professional football team in Tunisia. And you can see that with respect to the first leg and second leg, the training load was decreased. And obviously, it's much lower than the general preparation training load. This is usually what it happens. Obviously, during Ramadan, it's very difficult to train twice a day. So automatically, there will be one session less with respect to normal time, and training load will have a trend to decrease. Other issues related to Ramadan, but not only to Ramadan, to research in general. We have used to rely on statistical significance, and in the last decade, Hopkins and colleagues, and not only him, proposed us to look at the results in a quite different way, with also the clinical significance, and some of the former results of research could be misinterpreted because of the wrong way of looking at the results. Also here we have the control group. One of the main issues in Ramadan is obtaining a control group. You can imagine that coming to a Muslim who wants to fast and asking him just not to fast because we need a control group is not feasible. So if you are lucky, you have control groups. If you are unlucky, you have no control groups, and then the control situation would be to compare Ramadan values to pre and post-Ramadan values. Let's come now to general reviews on Ramadan. You have the review of Leeper and colleague about food and fluid restriction during Ramadan. Here, Rocky and colleagues about physiological and chronobiological changes during Ramadan. Riley and colleague Bahamam about general sleep. These are general reviews. Now, when it comes to sport, review of our group about performance during RAIF again, our group about pre-competition taper with a special reference to Ramadan. And here, Morgan and a colleague about the effects of fasting on physiology and performance. Less than 2 years ago, here in Aspetar, in this auditorium, Aspetar and FIFA organized a symposium about football and Ramadan. And this has led to a special issue of Journal of Sports Sciences that appeared about 6 months later. This special issue was edited by Morgan, Zerghini, Shalabi, and Vorak. And the first 4 articles of these 11 articles, because you know FIFA loves the number 11, the first four articles were about current challenges, health and well-being, sport nutrition, and sport hydration with Ramadan, during Ramadan. Then it comes to Drest and colleagues about circadian variation. Our group also wrote something about athletic performance, and Raki Herrera and Quanta Ahmed wrote something about sleep in athletes. In green here you have the only 2 original articles of this issue, one written by Chris about sleep and one by us about injury. And the last 2 articles are general recommendations about how to cope with Ramadan to try to maintain performance. The general effects of Ramadan intermittent fasting, the RIF, is that usually body composition changes, but over 1 to 2 kilos. But if the energy intake is well controlled, there is no change in body composition. There's at the level of acute effects. During the day, there's a dehydration that appears in the last hours of fasting. That's obvious. But there's an extraordinary adaptation of the body who is able to replenish the fluids, and at the chronicle level there's no effect of dehydration on the month. At the level of nutrition, it has been often observed a steep increase of the energy intake in the first days of fasting, and this is in the first days, the first week more specifically. And this has been observed with an increase of all fat, protein, and sugar incomes. And the number of meals is obviously changed. From 3 main meals, we switch to 2 meals. Some only take 1, which is an issue. But there's much more frequent snacking during the night. So people, when it comes to night, they don't stop eating and snacking. At the level of water, the water intake with respect to out of Ramadan periods is not changed. There is obviously at the end of the day, in the state of acute dehydration, the circulating blood volume is decreased, and then plasma osmolarity is then increased only during daytime. However, as I said before, chronically there's no issue with physiological. When it comes to some physiological effects, some reviews and original articles show that physiologically, to make an effort, when it comes to maximal efforts or even at rest, there's a switch to substrate utilization to lipolysis. So the body uses more fat during rest and during light activities, sparing the glycogen for intense exercise. During intense exercise, the glycogen is used as long as there is glycogen. At the level of the perceptual effects of Ramadan, athletes and non-athletes have reported usually that they are tired, they are irritable during Ramadan. There's also an issue with the beliefs. Coaches and athletes think that Ramadan is impacting negatively their performance, so athletes automatically decrease training load, and some athletes, coaches decrease training loads, and some athletes have a tendency to pace. Even though some of the results don't support this, we're going to see later that some performances are not changed during Ramadan. What is this? Okay, the rating of perceived exertion. And usually, the exercise is felt harder during Ramadan, even though the differences are quite modest and not always measurable. Let's come to the coping strategies. Roy and colleague published a paper quite recently about the training modification. We see that here the training time is changed obviously to end of the afternoon when we cannot train at night, but the best way would be to train at night, but we're going to see some studies comparing these time of days. And a training session, as I said before, the coaches tend to decrease, emphasize on quality, but training less in volume and training less in intensity. The psychologist could help, and the coach could help the athletes at the psychological level with some specific mental preparation and change in the attitudes and routines. And in this regard, the fasting athletes could have support from the non-fasting athletes if they are mixed, and also by the coach. And we can think about working about self-control, emotional control, and patience, which is also one of the philosophical basis of Ramadan and religion. So working on psychological effect could help the other efforts were made at the level of the physiology. Now let's come to Ramadan fasting and performance. We have to say that some studies have experimented competitive settings, but studies on top level athletes are scarce. As you know, for sports science, approaching top level athletes is quite difficult, but some of them are here. Few years ago, the main results showed that there was a decrease in all these variables. Physiological ones, anaerobic power, high intensity exercise performance, agility, short sprint, speed endurance, maximal aerobic power, and strength. These for the physiological outcomes. Also, some cognitive function have been shown to decrease during Ramadan. So this was the first idea. Ramadan is deleterious to physiological and psychological performance. I deleted some slides on road accidents and because I don't have enough time, but anyway. There are some data about road accidents with conflicting results. Let's come now to the well-controlled studies. In well-controlled studies, we mean obviously a control group and the monitoring of the food intake, fluid intake, rest, and training load. These are scarce. In some of these studies, we show that the researchers showed that performance is not impacted by Ramadan. We're going to see which performance later. Here in the study of Shawashi and colleagues, VO2 max, agility, sprint speed, endurance, capacity, power, anaerobic power, all these were not impacted by Ramadan. The only decrease was at the level of the continuous jumping for 30 seconds. At this performance was decreased during Ramadan. All the others were not decreased. But you will see later perhaps an explanation of this result. Here, let's come to one of our studies about mainly anaerobic performance, which is the Wingate test, mainly anaerobic, but there is a lot of aerobic inside. We compare the Wingate test before Ramadan, in the middle of Ramadan, second week, and at the end of Ramadan, in the morning and the afternoon, the effect of the time of day. Morning was 7 o'clock, and the afternoon was 5 p.m. And here you see that obviously everybody knows that the performance is the short-term performance is decreased at the afternoon, is increased at the afternoon because of the effect of body temperature, which is raised. But this increase of power observed at the end of the afternoon, at the level of peak power and mean power, decreases during Ramadan. During Ramadan, in the afternoon, there is somewhat a fatigue that appears that impacts the anaerobic performance. The fatigue index, which is also higher in the morning, in the afternoon, in normal day, is even higher at the end of the afternoon in Ramadan. So in these soccer players, Ramadan had an impact of decreasing the end of afternoon power and increasing the fatigue. The same author, Nizar Swisi, also showed the same tendency with another test, the physiology test, which is a shorter test. And of course, there was the natural increase of power at 5 o'clock in the afternoon with respect to the morning. But here, at the end of the afternoon and at night, the power output decreased at the end of Ramadan. So at the end of Ramadan, there could be an impact of some performances. These authors explain their result by a shift in the sleep-wake time cycle, but other variables could play also a role. You can see here that two studies, one published by a team from Israel and here another team from Zergini, Kirkendall, Jung, and Vorak. In these both studies about soccer players, there was, with the decrease in performance, there was also a decrease in the training intensity. So here, there were two effects merged, which was the Ramadan effect, obviously, and also the quite detraining effects. When you detrain training load, when you decrease training load, depending on the usual training load, if it was a very high training load, it's a taper, it's good. But if the training load was normal, if you decrease it, you have, after 4 weeks, you could have a detraining effect. So performing scientific research without monitoring training load is an issue at the level when it comes to interpret the data. Here, to illustrate this, you have a study from another team. This study was conducted in Tunisia by Kirkendall and colleague, and here they had the chance, we're going to speak of that later, the chance to have the athletes living in a camp setting. So where the sleep is controlled, the food intake is controlled, the fluid is controlled, and the training load is controlled. In this situation, they also had the chance to have a control group, and there was no significant change of performance between during Ramadan, and no difference between the fasting and non-fasting players. So when you control a certain important variables, performance seems not to be impacted so much. Here, quite a strange studies from Carly and colleagues from Turkey. During this month of Ramadan, it's not very usual to see this. The body weight and free fat mass had a tendency to increase. They increased it from 1 kilo. The difference was not significant, but 1 kilo more fat-free mass. And obviously, here, the mean and peak power measured during the Wingate test were increased. So some studies show increases of performances. We have to try to explain why this increase occurred, but anyway, this is a result. So Ramadan is not always accompanied with decrease of performances. Here, we come again to Anis Shawashi study. He did his PhD on Ramadan, and here there is the article that presented the performance measures. And as I told you before, there were no changes, or almost, in performance. But I would like to draw your attention that these tests were performed between 2 and 4 in the afternoon. At that time in Tunisia, the fast breaking took place at around 6:30, 7. So testing between 2 and 4 in the afternoon is the middle of the afternoon, not the very end of the afternoon. This will bring us to the chronobiological effect of studying Ramadan. The same study with the results of the lipid profile and the hematological and inflammatory and immunological results shows that there was obviously a cascade of adjustments, but these changes were in the normal range seen in healthy individuals. The only trend, there's a trend to pro-inflammatory status, as we can see in overreached athletes. So there's a fatigue at the end of Ramadan, but there's not a huge change in the physiology. Here again, a well-controlled study by Aziz and colleagues from Singapore, showing that the maximal aerobic power did not change during Ramadan in these young soccer players. When I say young, it will come to the time, are these subjects fasting for the first or second time, or are these subjects used to fast? For the study of Anis Shawashi and colleagues, the The subjects were the national team of judo, so quite high level, and they were used to fast for 7 years. Being studied after 7 years of training to train with while fasting is not as when you fast for the ever first time. Let's come now to the last part before the practical recommendations. I'm going to fly over some recent studies. When I say recent, the two 2012 and 2013 studies. Here is a study published here by the REC, by Sébastien Racinet and colleagues, showing that in Qatari, in moderately active adults, obviously the activity switches to night and the peak of activity is observed in the middle of the night. And the total energy expenditure and body mass were stayed constant during that study. And there was no change in performance of force performance of the lower limbs. This was not observed by another study conducted by Bouhlel and colleagues. It's another team working on Ramadan in Tunisia, who showed and decreased and observed a decrease in the power of lower and upper and lower limbs, tested with a force velocity test, and this was observed already at the end of the first week of Ramadan. There was a tendency of the partial return to arm data to initial values at the fourth week of Ramadan. So the first week could also be accompanied with drastic changes. The sum of other performance as vertical jump and hand grip force were not changed. And in this study, again, seldom when you see a decrease in performance, usually there's decrease in energy intake. So we have to take this into consideration. Here the testing were switched a bit more to the end of the day. It was in Tunisia. Breaking the fast was about 6:30, so they started to be tested at 3 and finished at 5, which is quite end of the afternoon, just before breaking the fast. Here another study from Olivier Girard and Farouk from the Aspetar staff, studying the repeat and sprint ability, the RSA, in very young boys. And they showed that the total performance, the total sprint time was higher during Ramadan. Some of other performances did not change during Ramadan. And here there was an increase in the body fat and lean mass during Ramadan. This is not usual, but it happens. Again, here the testing, time of testing, it was between 1 and 2 o'clock. Let's say middle of the day, middle of the fasting day. Here we have a study of our group about the performance of judoists. At the end of Ramadan, there was a decrease in vertical jump performance, and the heart rate was higher out of Ramadan respect to Ramadan, and also in a judo-specific test, the Ishikomi technical gesture was lower during Ramadan. But in this study, the food intake was not monitored. This is drawback of this study and other studies, and the body mass was only measured once, which is really a weakness of this study. Again, another study of the group only reporting one measure of body mass with no monitoring of the food intake, showing that most of the performance measures were negatively impacted by Ramadan, the yo-yo intermittent recovery, and the peak power and total work during a RSA test, and also during a Wingate test. All these variables were decreased during Ramadan, and the perceived exertion and fatigue were increased. But here we cannot interpret it very well because we don't have the food intake. This is another study just appeared in the International Journal of Sport Physiology and Performance a few months ago about again RSA and Ramadan. Here some hematological measures of which plasma potassium were measured, and mainly there was some decrease of performances, that have been linked by the authors of here higher sorry, there was a higher potassium explaining some of that could explain some of the fatigue observed. This is a very interesting study of Aziz from Rashid Aziz. Aziz is the family name, from Singapore. They were really brave, asking the fasters to do a training which consists of 6 Wingate tests with 4 minutes of recovery in between. This is very, very hard effort. And they was asking the question, what is the optimal time of day to perform this, morning, afternoon, or night? Here you have 2 main results. The first main result is that when it comes to very intensive intermittent training as a 6 Wingate test, this performance was lower during Ramadan than before Ramadan at 8 and 6 o'clock in the afternoon, but not in the evening. So when it comes to very intense intermittent training, you can do it at night without being impacted negatively. When it comes to a different effort, which is endurance training, time to exhaustion cycle, at that time there's a big change with an impact on the end of the afternoon moment, but not morning and night. So if you do an endurance effort, if you do it in the morning and at night, it is not negatively impacted. The only problem in the morning is that if you do a hard endurance training session in the morning, you cannot drink and eat just after the session. This is a big issue. But anyway, you can perform. At the level acutely you can perform. Ramadan fasting and unit violations in aerobic and anaerobic performance in young soccer players. Here again you have a RSA, repeated speed ability test. And the peak power and total work were decreased at the end of Ramadan. The RPE after RSA were high during at the end of Ramadan. And also the intermittent endurance performance was lower. But here the authors explain the result with the role of partial sleep deprivation, which is always present during Ramadan. And these also result could be explained by the daily energy intake and body composition. Here we can see that in this study there was not a significant decrease, but a tendency to decrease lean mass. Lean mass went from 61 kilos to 60 kilos, 700 grams of decrease. And obviously there was where is it? The total daily intake went from 3,300 to 2,700. So when you decrease your energy intake, you can impact negatively. You will help Ramadan to impact negatively on your performance. I'm gonna skip the last slides just to go directly to the practical recommendations. There are some other studies. I can send them to you if you want. I also skipped some slides, so I think that there will be 4 or 5 studies that I will not review today. Let's come to the last part of the lecture, the practical recommendations, how to cope with Ramadan. As many changes occurred in the first week of Ramadan, it could be useful to use the 2 weeks before Ramadan to implement progressive changes in the eating habits and sleeping habits. Napping during the day, bedtime later, try to relatively fast during the day and eat more during the night. This will help not to have a steep change during the first days of Ramadan. Of course, there's a need of a dietitian to help the athletes in having a good energy intake and with appetizing food. And this dietitian or nutritionist will help also control dehydration with some pre and post-training urine concentration checking, which could be helpful to to detect who of the athletes are not hydrating well when it comes to training at night, of course. Here we can see together all the staff, the coach, the psychologist, the medical staff, the exercise physiologist, the fitness coach, and the sport nutritionist. If they all come together in training camp settings, this will be a very useful setting to help the athletes cope with recovery, fluid and food intake, and manage training load in order to have the minimal impact of Ramadan on their performance. Of course, in these settings, we have to monitor training load, as we showed that if you decrease training load, if you have drastic decrease in training load, there will be a detraining effect that will merge to the change of the circadian rhythm, and which is really negative, and we saw it. It is negative to performance. Obviously, the hard training sessions would have to be switched at night, if possible, and if not possible, just before breaking the fast, in order to be able to eat and drink just after the shower. During the day, it's obviously clear that you have to avoid exposition to heat or direct sun, and if possible, stay in cool and humid, relatively humid places. And if it comes to training during the night, you can advise your players or athletes to rinse their mouth with cool water. This could help psychologically. Last slide. If the body mass, the hydration status, the mood and recovery status are well controlled, this will allow to detect immediate changes and then to cope with these and to try to explore and to see what's wrong immediately when it happens. And some individuals, there's an inter-subject variability in the coping capacity of subjects, so you have to look at your group more individually, and especially, more specifically, to the athletes who are fasting for the first year. Young athletes who are fasting for the first year, you have to look at them more specifically. I thank you very much for your attention. In the symposium that was held here, Dr. Kirkendall described us a very interesting story, and it's written in one of the articles there. In USA, obviously not everybody fasts, and one of the coaches of a young football team noted that he had two Muslim players fasting in his team, and he did big work of approaching Ramadan by going to their families to speak with them and to know for himself, to know more about Ramadan, and then he translated these ideas to the teammates and asked for the group to help these two athletes. And what happened? It happened that during the days at school, when it came to the lunch time, half of the players went to lunch, the others stayed with the Muslims in the classroom to accompany them, and then they switched to always be close to these. And he also asked them to change training time to come closer to breaking fast. I don't remember if it was night. I think it was night or just before the fast. And as he did this great job of approach of Ramadan, everybody followed him in his project. So there was a psychological support of these two Muslim athletes. Now, if you come to a normal elite football team like FC Bayern Monaco, I don't know, it will be difficult to ask of Bayern to change all these their habits for only one or two players. So this is an issue. But it's true that if you train hard in the morning, you have this problem of hydrating and feeding yourself after the training session. If it happens only seldom, it's okay. But some of the European teams have this habit of only training in the morning, and this is a real issue. As far as I remember, in all these studies, there were males. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I tried to emphasize on the time of testing and the nature of tests. There's no study for now studying, for example, long endurance performance in the heat. For example, playing a football game under the sun at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, like happens in the Maghreb and other countries, has not been investigated. The other issue that just we spoke about, training very hard in the morning and waiting for the iftar at 7, or in Europe at 10 o'clock in London or in Oslo. Don't speak of Oslo, you die there. And it's an issue. You can do it once, twice, but can you do it for the whole month? All these has not been answered. So there's more to know than what we already know. That's clear. It slides 11 days. Yeah. Yeah, this happened in the last Olympic Games in London, and a team from Aspetar went to ask the two or three teams, Muslim teams that participated in the London Games. And before the games, they asked them, "Are you going to fast?" And one of the points was that the coaches wanted the athletes, the players, not to fast during the competition days. And they said, "No, I'm going to fast during the training days, but not during competitions." And depending on the beliefs and depending on how to cope it, a lot of players do not fast during the playing days, but they fast outside of this. This also has to be experimented, because when you fast every day and you come to the competition day and you take your breakfast, okay, you are replenished, but you change everything also. So this has to be also, to answer Dr. Schumacher, this also has to be experienced.
Solution. And regarding Ramadan during the competition, like in London, I was there and I can tell you, the great majority of the Muslim countries, they are not fasting during all the period of the competition.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's for a coach, it's easier to have a non-fasting player because he can keep his chronobiology. But there are some fasting players, and you have to teach them for the hydration. You have to teach them how to better drink during the night time, because one of the errors is drinking too much fluid at a time, and this is counterproductive. You have issues with this, and so you have the dietitian or the nutritionist who has to make his best to have them in the allowed time, and during the daytime you have to avoid dehydration. This is you do your best, but there's no ideal as far as I know response to avoid the issues. Yes, I said that if you are in training camp, it's easier because you have the athletes with you. You can be with them. You can control when they go to bed, when they rest, when they eat, when they drink, etc. You told us that athletes usually do not feel Ramadan as impacting negatively. 2 years ago in the symposium here in the auditorium, 3 professional players came here, and some of them were really complaining, saying that they were fasting, but the last week of Ramadan was tremendous for them. They were professional football players, so having quite long training session of 1.5 hours, and the end of Ramadan, if it comes to hot environment, we can understand that some fatigue will come. And this is individual. There is also the faith. If you believe in God, you think that if you fast, you will be stronger. This is a psychological effect. But anyway, they feel some of them feel some fatigue at the end of Ramadan. That's obvious. Yeah, okay. No, I completely agree that that could happen, but without fasting, not fasting, these performance can vary of 5 and 10 minutes. That happens, but perhaps that discus throw is one discipline that could not be impacted so much by Ramadan because it's very short-term exercise. But if it comes to marathon, we had the Tunisian swimmer who swam in the sea, I don't know, 10 kilometers, something like that. He was drinking, and the Tunisians who wished him to fast were really happy to have the gold medal, you know. So at one side we were saying, he's Muslim, he should fast, but as he had a gold medal, okay, he can drink. After Ramadan. You are in a critical, the first week after Ramadan is also accompanied with, again, many changes of the circadian rhythm. And you have an issue. I think that you have to come close to the REC department. You're going to speak with Chris Herrera about sleeping, and he can perhaps help you to desynchronize the sleeping and wake cycle. This can be done. I think we can discuss it later at the department.
Other questions? Yes.
If you if you are in Qatar and competing against Qatari teams, you have no problems. They are all fasting. They are all relatively facing the same issues. You can, of course, try to optimize the hydration, hydration education. You can do what you want. But if it comes to competing against non-Muslim teams, you will have perhaps some problems, because if it's hot and humid and the body temperature rises, the athlete will automatically pace, and this could impact his performance. In football, pacing could relatively impact performance, but if it comes to 10,000 meters or marathon, you're going to have big issues. But again, it's not because there are some research studies on Ramadan that we have all the answers to all your problems.
Okay, we can
Thank you.
As you see, there is lots of questions. You are now here. You are going to have excellent team, and I wish you the best.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.